Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. We should have never stopped at that gas station. When I found that Polaroid tucked under my windshield wiper the next morning, showing me and Ashley fast asleep in our car from an angle that should have been impossible, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake stopping at that place. But let me back up and tell you how it all started. Ashley and I had been planning this cross-country road trip for months. We'd just graduated college, and before we both started our new jobs, we wanted one last adventure together. The plan was simple: drive from Boston to San Francisco, take our time, see America. We'd packed snacks, made playlists, and mapped out interesting stops along the way. Everything was perfect for the first 3 days. We were somewhere in rural Kansas when it happened. We'd been driving for hours through endless fields of corn and wheat, the kind of landscape that makes you feel like you're the only people left on Earth. The sun was setting, painting everything orange and red, and we were both getting tired. Ashley was dozing in the passenger seat, her head against the window, when I saw the gas station up ahead. It wasn't much to look at, the kind of place you'd normally drive right past, but my tank was running low and we still had at least 50 miles to the next town according to our GPS. I pulled up to the pump and gently shook Ashley awake. She mumbled, stretching and looking around at the empty lot. "Middle of nowhere," I said, getting out to pump gas. The bell above the door chimed when I walked in, and I immediately noticed how quiet it was. No radio playing, no hum of refrigerators, just this heavy silence that made me want to whisper. The aisles were stocked with the usual road trip necessities, but everything looked old, like really old. The candy bars had packaging I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and the magazines by the counter were months out of date. Behind the register stood a man who looked to be in his 50s, thin and pale, with greasy hair combed straight back. He watched me as I grabbed some chips and sodas, his eyes never leaving me as I moved through the store. When I approached the counter, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He asked, his voice soft and raspy. "Yeah, just heading west," I replied, pulling out my wallet. He rang up my items slowly, deliberately. Something about the way he asked made me uncomfortable. It felt too personal, too interested. "California," I said vaguely, not wanting to give specifics. He nodded and bagged my items. "Beautiful girl you got there," he said, glancing out the window toward Ashley, who was still sitting in the passenger seat. "Y'all be careful now." I paid quickly and walked back to the car, that uncomfortable feeling growing stronger with each step. Ashley was awake now, looking at her phone. "No signal out here," she said as I got back in. But as I started the engine, I noticed the attendant had come outside and was standing by the window, still watching us. He raised his hand in what might have been a wave, that same unsettling smile on his face. I pulled out of the lot faster than I probably should have. We drove in relative silence for the next hour, both of us feeling oddly shaken by the encounter. Ashley tried to lighten the mood by putting on some music, but even that felt forced. As darkness fell completely, we started looking for a place to stop for the night. We found a small motel about 40 miles down the road and checked in. The room was basic but clean, and we were both exhausted. After sharing some of the snacks from the gas station, we settled in to watch TV before bed. That's when Ashley noticed it first. She asked, looking through her suitcase. "It's not where I left it." I helped her look through both our bags, but we couldn't find the hairbrush anywhere. Ashley was sure she'd packed it, but we figured maybe she'd left it at the last hotel. These things happen on road trips. But the next morning when we were packing up the car, Ashley found her hairbrush in the glove compartment. She definitely hadn't put it there. And when I checked my own bag, I noticed my deodorant was in a different pocket than where I always kept it. "Maybe we're just tired," I said, but I could see the worry in Ashley's eyes. We got back on the highway trying to shake off the weird feeling, but throughout the day we kept noticing little things that were off. Ashley's phone charger was in my bag instead of hers. A pen that I always kept in the center console was in the back seat. Small things, easy to explain away individually, but together they formed a pattern that made us both uneasy. It was around noon when Ashley's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She glanced at it and went pale. I asked. She held up her phone, and I saw a photo of our car parked at the gas station from the night before, but it was taken from inside the building, through the window, and you could clearly see both of us in the front seats. I asked, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. "I don't know." Another text came through. This one was a photo of us walking into the motel, taken from across the parking lot. Then another, us through our motel room window, sitting on the bed watching TV. My heart was pounding now. But before Ashley could dial, another photo came through. This one made us both gasp. It showed us asleep in our motel room, taken from inside the room. Ashley was curled up on her side and I was on my back, mouth slightly open. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m. "Someone was in our room," Ashley whispered, her voice shaking. I pulled over at the next exit, my hands trembling as I tried to think clearly. We called the police, but they said without knowing who was sending the messages, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested we file a report when we got to the next big city. We decided to keep driving, to put as much distance as possible between us and whoever was doing this. But the messages kept coming. Photos of us at gas stations we'd stopped at hours earlier. Pictures taken from behind bushes as we ate lunch at a roadside diner. Someone was following us, documenting our every move. The worst part was, we never saw anyone suspicious. No cars that seemed to be tailing us, no one taking photos, nothing. It was like we were being watched by a ghost. On our third night after the gas station incident, we checked into a hotel in Colorado. We were exhausted, paranoid, and barely speaking to each other. The constant fear had worn us down. We double-locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and tried to get some sleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of Ashley whispering my name urgently. She was sitting up in bed, staring at something on her phone. "Look," she said, showing me the screen. It was a live video feed of us in our hotel room, right now. I could see myself looking at Ashley's phone, could see the exact angle of the camera. It was somewhere up near the ceiling in the corner of the room. I jumped out of bed and searched frantically, but I couldn't find any camera. The feed continued, showing us searching the room, our panic visible on our faces. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the feed cut out. We packed our bags and left immediately, driving through the night until we reached Ashley's sister's house in Denver. We stayed there for 2 days, afraid to continue our trip, afraid to go home. The messages had stopped, but we couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. Finally, we worked up the courage to drive back to Boston. The trip home was tense but uneventful. No strange messages, no mysterious photos. We started to relax, to convince ourselves that whatever nightmare we'd been living was over. But on our last morning on the road, as we pulled into a rest stop just outside Boston, I found that Polaroid tucked under my windshield wiper. It showed me and Ashley asleep in our car, but we hadn't slept in the car at all during our trip. We'd stayed in hotels and motels every night. I looked at the photo more closely and felt my blood run cold. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably there, was the gas station. The same one where this all started. According to the timestamp on the photo, it was taken 3 nights ago. But that was impossible. 3 nights ago, we were in Denver at Ashley's sister's house. We were nowhere near Kansas. Ashley looked at the photo and started crying. She kept asking, "I don't know how to explain what happened to us on that road trip. The police said the photos could have been doctored, that someone was probably just trying to scare us. But I know what I saw. I know what we experienced. To this day, I check my car before every trip, looking for cameras or tracking devices I know I'll never find." Ashley won't do road trips anymore. She flies everywhere now, says she'll never trust the open road again. Sometimes late at night, I still get text messages from unknown numbers. They're usually just photos of empty highways or gas stations, nothing threatening. But I know what they mean. They're reminders that somewhere out there, someone is still watching, still documenting, still waiting. I never found out who was behind it all, or how they managed to be everywhere we went without us ever seeing them. But I learned something important on that trip. There are places in this country where the rules don't apply, where normal logic breaks down, and where stopping for gas might be the last normal thing you ever do. We should have never stopped at that gas station, but I think somehow we were always meant to. Story 2. The Hitchhiker Who Knew My Name. The Polaroid fell out of his jacket pocket when he got out of our car, and when I picked it up, I saw myself at age 7, asleep in my childhood bedroom in a house I hadn't lived in for 15 years. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how normal everything seemed at first. My girlfriend Kayla and I were driving through Oregon, heading to Portland for her cousin's wedding. It was one of those perfect summer afternoons where the sun filters through the trees just right, and you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. We'd been on the road for about 3 hours, taking our time, enjoying the scenic route along Route 49. That's when we saw him. A guy standing on the side of the road with his thumb out, getting soaked by a sudden downpour that had come out of nowhere. He looked harmless enough, maybe 35, wearing jeans and a brown jacket with dark hair plastered to his head from the rain. Kayla asked. She was always the compassionate one, couldn't stand to see anyone suffering. I hesitated. I'd always heard horror stories about picking up hitchhikers, but this guy looked genuinely stranded. No car in sight, no houses nearby, just miles of empty road in both directions. "I guess," I said, pulling over. The guy jogged up to our car with a grateful smile. He was older than I'd first thought, with weathered skin and tired eyes, but his demeanor was polite and non-threatening. "Thank you so much," he said as he slid into the back seat. "I really appreciate this." "No problem," Kayla said, turning around to smile at him. "I'm Kayla. This is Tyler. Just to the next town, if that's okay." For the first 20 minutes, everything was perfectly normal. Marcus was quiet but polite, thanking us again for the ride, making small talk about the weather. He seemed like a decent guy who'd had some bad luck. But then he started asking questions. He asked, "No, we're from California. California's nice." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Actually, yeah. Small town called Riverside." "Lucky guess. I bet your mom still lives in that house on Maple Street." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My mom did live on Maple Street in a blue house, and she did have rose bushes, but I'd never mentioned any of that. I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Marcus chuckled. "Oh, you know how it is. But Riverside wasn't a small town. It had over 300,000 people, and Maple Street was just one of hundreds of streets in a sprawling suburban maze." Marcus continued, "Playing in that backyard, climbing that old oak tree?" I pulled over so fast that Kayla grabbed the dashboard to steady herself. I said, turning around to face Marcus, "How do you know about my backyard?" Marcus just smiled, and for the first time I noticed something wrong with his eyes. They were too dark, like looking into deep water at night. I know lots of things about you, Tyler. I know you broke your arm falling out of that tree when you were 8. I know you had a dog named Rusty who got hit by a car when you were 12. My heart was pounding now. Those were things only my family knew. Private things. Childhood memories I'd never shared with anyone, not even Kayla. I demanded, I told you my name's Marcus, and I've been waiting for you for a long time, Tyler. Waiting for me? But Marcus didn't answer. He just sat there smiling that unsettling smile, his 2 dark eyes fixed on mine. Kayla grabbed my arm. Tyler, let's just go. I started the car and drove to the next town, my mind racing. How could this stranger know such intimate details about my childhood? There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe he'd looked me up online somehow, found old social media posts or public records. But even that didn't explain how he knew about the tree or my dog or my nightmares. When we reached the town, I pulled into the first parking lot I saw, a small diner with a few cars scattered around. I asked Marcus, not turning around. Perfect. He opened the door and got out, but before closing it, he leaned down to look at me. Give my regards to your mother, Tyler. He winked. Oh, and Tyler, you might want to start locking your bedroom door at night again. He closed the door and walked toward the diner without looking back. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Kayla asked. I have no idea. We drove in silence for about 10 miles before Kayla spoke again. I don't know, maybe he's some kind of con man, does research on people before targeting them. But why me? I called my mom that night from our hotel room. I tried to be casual about it, asking if she'd been in touch with anyone from my childhood lately, anyone named Marcus. She said, and I could hear something change in her voice. We picked up a hitchhiker today. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mom? Tyler, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If you see that man again, you need to get away from him immediately. What? Why? I can't explain it over the phone. Just promise me you'll be careful. And Tyler, start locking your doors at night. She hung up before I could ask any more questions. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every shadow outside our window looked like a figure standing there. Kayla thought I was being paranoid, but she locked the door anyway. The next morning, as we were packing up the car, I found the Polaroid. It had fallen under the passenger seat, and at first I thought it was just some random photo left by a previous rental customer. But when I looked at it closely, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It was me, 7 years old, fast asleep in my childhood bedroom. I recognized everything: the dinosaur sheets, the model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, the nightlight shaped like a rocket ship. But what made it truly terrifying was the angle of the photo. It was taken from inside my closet, looking out at my bed. I'd had nightmares about monsters in my closet from the time I was 5 until I was about 10. My parents had eventually removed the closet door entirely to prove to me that nothing was hiding in there. But someone had been in that closet. Someone had been watching me sleep. The timestamp on the photo showed a date from 20 years ago. I would have been 7 years old, exactly like in the picture. But that was impossible. The photo looked recent, like it had been taken with a modern instant camera. The quality was too good for something that old. I showed Kayla the photo and she went pale. "This is insane," she said. "And tell them what?" We drove straight to Portland without stopping, constantly checking our mirrors for any sign of Marcus. But we never saw him again. When we got home, I called my mom again and demanded answers. She finally told me about Marcus, though her explanation only made things worse. She said he'd been a neighbor when I was very young, before we moved to Maple Street. She said he'd seemed nice at first, always offering to help with yard work or babysit when my parents went out. But then strange things started happening. Items would go missing from our house. My mom would find muddy footprints under my bedroom window. Once she'd caught him sitting in his car outside our house at 2 a.m. just watching. When she confronted him, he claimed he was protecting me from something, that there were dangerous things out there that only he could keep away. My parents got a restraining order, but Marcus disappeared before the police could serve it. We moved away partly because of him, my mom said. But how could he know about our new house? I don't know, sweetheart. After that conversation, I did some research online. I found a few old newspaper articles about a man named Marcus Whelan who'd been arrested multiple times for stalking families with young children. The photos were grainy, but they looked like the same person who'd gotten into our car. According to the articles, Marcus had disappeared while awaiting trial 15 years ago. The police assumed he'd fled the state or changed his identity. But if that was true, how had he known we'd be driving on Route 49 that day? How had he managed to time it so perfectly that we'd find him right there, looking helpless and harmless in the rain? And how did he still have that photo of me sleeping? I've changed all my locks since then. I've made my social media profiles private and had my phone number changed. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of a figure standing across the street from my apartment. Too far away to make out clearly, but always the right height and build to be Marcus. Kayla thinks I'm paranoid, and maybe I am, but I can't shake the feeling that our encounter on Route 49 wasn't random. Marcus said he'd been waiting for me for a long time. The question that keeps me awake at night is, how long? And is he still waiting? Story 3. I took a wrong turn and ended up in a town that doesn't exist. The worst part wasn't finding my own face on every missing person flyer in town. The worst part was realizing the date on those flyers was from next week. And I still don't know how I'm supposed to get home, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I ended up in Millbrook, a town that shouldn't exist but somehow trapped me for 3 days. I was driving from Denver to my sister's place in Omaha, a route I'd taken dozens of times before. It should have been a straightforward 8-hour drive on familiar highways, but somewhere outside North Platte, Nebraska, my GPS died. Just went black, wouldn't respond to anything. My phone had no signal either, which wasn't unusual in that part of the state, so I wasn't too worried. I remembered seeing a small town marked on an old paper map I kept in the glove compartment. Millbrook, about 30 miles off the interstate. I figured I could stop there, get directions, maybe grab some coffee and wait for my phone to pick up a signal. The detour would only add an hour to my trip. The road to Millbrook was narrow and winding, cutting through cornfields that stretched to the horizon in every direction. As I drove deeper into farm country, I started to feel oddly isolated, like I was the only person left in the world. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. When I finally saw the town ahead, my first thought was that time had stopped there sometime in the 1950s. The main street was lined with old-fashioned storefronts, a barber shop with a red and white pole, a diner with neon signs in the window, a movie theater with an old-style marquee. Everything looked perfectly preserved, like a museum exhibit of small-town America. But something felt wrong from the moment I parked on Main Street. The town was completely silent. No traffic, no conversations, no sounds of everyday life. Just this heavy, oppressive quiet that made me want to whisper. I walked into what looked like the main diner, a place called Mabel's with checkered floors and red vinyl booths. There were people inside, maybe a dozen customers scattered around the dining room. But when I walked in, every single one of them stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me. Not casual glances. Full body turns, eyes locked on mine, expressions completely blank. A man in overalls stopped mid-bite of his pie. A woman in a yellow dress froze with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Even the waitress behind the counter stood perfectly still. Order pad in hand, staring at me without blinking. Excuse me, I said to the waitress. She didn't respond. None of them did. They just kept staring at me with those blank, empty expressions. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my skin crawling under their collective gaze before I backed toward the door. Okay, never mind. I left the diner and tried the gas station across the street. Same thing happened. The moment I walked in, the 3 customers inside turned to stare at me, and the clerk behind the register just stood there motionless, watching me with unblinking eyes. By now, my heart was pounding. Something was seriously wrong with this place, and I needed to get out. But when I tried to leave town the way I'd come in, I found myself driving in circles. Every road I took led me back to Main Street, like the town was caught in some kind of loop. I tried going east, following what should have been the main road out of town. After 15 minutes of driving through cornfields, I saw the Millbrook town limits sign ahead of me. But I was approaching from the west, the same direction I'd originally come from. Somehow, I'd ended up right back where I started. I tried going north, then south, then every possible combination of turns I could think of. But no matter which direction I went, no matter how far I drove, I always ended up back on Main Street. The gas gauge on my car was dropping steadily and panic was starting to set in. As night fell, I decided to find somewhere to stay until morning, hoping things would make more sense in daylight. There was a small motel at the end of Main Street, the Millbrook Inn, with a neon vacancy sign flickering in the window. The desk clerk was an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a kind smile, the first person in town who seemed remotely normal. When I walked into the lobby, he looked up from his newspaper and greeted me like any other guest. "Evening?" "Yes, please." "Of course." He turned the guest book toward me. I looked down at the book and felt my blood run cold. Every entry on the page was the same name, mine. Different dates, different handwriting styles, but all signed with my full name. Some entries went back months. I asked, pointing to the signatures. The clerk looked confused. "Joke? No, sir. But these are all my name." He peered at the book through his glasses, then looked back at me with a puzzled expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see what you mean." I stared at the page again. The signatures were clearly identical, written in my exact handwriting, but the clerk seemed genuinely unable to see it. "Never mind," I said, signing my name below the others. "Room 7, just down the hall." The room was small but clean, with old-fashioned furnishings and a view of Main Street through lace curtains. I tried my phone again. Still no signal. I tried the room phone, but there was no dial tone. I was completely cut off from the outside world. I barely slept that night. Every hour or so, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway outside my room, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw people from the diner and gas station just standing there in the dim hallway light, staring at my door. The next morning, I was determined to find a way out of town. I walked up and down Main Street looking for someone who could help me, someone who might actually respond when I spoke to them. That's when I saw the missing person flyers. They were posted on telephone poles, storefront windows, and bulletin boards all over town. At first, I thought it was strange that such a small place would have so many missing people. But when I got close enough to read them, I realized they were all the same person. Me. Every flyer had my photo, my exact photo, the one from my driver's license. Same clothes I was wearing right now, same expression, everything identical. The text below read, "Missing, last seen in Millbrook, NIGHTFALL." But here's what made it truly terrifying. The date on the flyers was 6 days in the future. I ran from flyer to flyer, checking every single one I could find. They all had the same future date. All showed me missing from a place where I was currently standing. According to these flyers, I was going to disappear from Millbrook almost a week from now. I found the police station and burst through the front door, desperate for help. A uniformed officer sat behind a desk, filling out paperwork. "Officer, I need help." He looked up at me with the same blank expression I'd seen everywhere else. "Yes, every road leads back to Main Street. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not sure what you mean. There's only one road in or out of Millbrook. But I've tried that road." The officer studied me for a long moment, then pulled out a missing person flyer, one of mine, and compared it to my face. "And sir, are you feeling all right?" My hands were shaking now. "Those flyers are dated in the future." He looked at the flyer again, then back at me. "This says today's date, sir." I grabbed the flyer from his hands and looked at the date. To me, it clearly showed next week's date, but when I tried to point it out to him, he insisted it showed today's date. I spent the second day trying everything I could think of. I drew maps of my attempts to leave town, documenting every road and every turn that brought me back to Main Street. I tried leaving on foot, hiking across the cornfields in a straight line away from town. But after walking for hours, I'd somehow end up back on Main Street, approaching from the opposite direction. The people in town continued to watch me wherever I went, their blank stares following my every movement. They'd respond to direct questions with simple, unhelpful answers, but they seemed incapable of actually helping me or acknowledging that anything was wrong. On the third day, I was sitting in my motel room trying to figure out what to do next, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find the desk clerk standing there with a concerned expression. "Well, according to our records, you checked out 3 days ago." "I've been here 3 days, yes." He consulted a clipboard in his hands. "It says here you were supposed to leave on your first day, but we keep seeing you around town. Look, I'll pay for the extra nights." "Oh, that's not necessary, sir." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Like this was a common occurrence, like people got trapped in Millbrook all the time. "Well, Millbrook's a special place, sir. Ready?" But he just smiled that same kind, unhelpful smile and walked away. That night, I made one last desperate attempt to escape. I waited until 3 a.m., then got in my car and drove as fast as I could in a straight line out of town. I didn't care about roads or directions, I just wanted to put distance between myself and Millbrook. I drove for what felt like hours through empty cornfields, my headlights cutting through the darkness. I was sure I'd finally broken free, that I'd find a highway or another town or any sign of the normal world. But as the sun started to rise, I saw the Millbrook water tower in the distance ahead of me. Somehow I'd driven in a perfect circle and ended up right back where I started. That's when I found myself sitting in my car on Main Street at dawn, staring at those impossible missing person flyers, trying to understand how I'd become lost in a place that didn't seem to exist on any map. I don't know how long I was really in Millbrook. Time seemed to work differently there, but eventually, on what I think was the 4th morning, I woke up in my motel room to the sound of my phone buzzing with notifications. I had full signal bars and 17 missed calls from my sister. I packed my things as quickly as possible and got in my car, afraid that if I hesitated, I'd somehow get stuck again. This time, when I drove out of town, the road led straight to the interstate. I didn't look back. When I got to my sister's house, she was frantic with worry. According to her, I was 3 days late and she'd been calling the police to report me missing. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. When I checked the dates on my phone, I'd only been gone for 1 day. One single day, even though I clearly remembered being in Millbrook for 3 or 4 days. I tried to find Millbrook again later using online maps and GPS. I've searched for any record of the town, any mention in state databases or historical records. But there's nothing. No town called Millbrook in that part of Nebraska. The area where it should have been is just empty farmland. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if I had some kind of breakdown and spent those missing days somewhere else entirely. But I still have one of those missing person flyers in my wallet, the one with my face on it, dated for next week. The date has changed. Now it shows tomorrow's date, and I don't know what that means, but I'm not taking any chances. I'm staying home tomorrow, doors locked, curtains drawn, because I have the terrible feeling that Millbrook isn't done with me yet. Story 4. Someone followed us for 300 miles. I'm still checking my rearview mirror obsessively, even though this happened 6 months ago. Every red car I see makes my heart race, and I can't drive at night anymore without feeling like someone's watching me. But let me tell you about the 3 days when a stranger in a red sedan followed my husband and me for 300 miles across 2 states, and how we discovered we weren't his first victims. Derek and I were driving from Phoenix to his brother's wedding in Albuquerque. We'd made this trip before. It's a straight shot up I-17 to I-40, about 4.5 hours of mostly desert highway. We'd left early Saturday morning, planning to arrive with plenty of time to get ready for the rehearsal dinner. The first time I noticed the red sedan, we were about an hour outside Phoenix. It was just another car in the endless stream of weekend traffic. Nothing particularly memorable about it except for the color. A deep burgundy red that stood out against the beige landscape. Derek was driving, and I was reading a book in the passenger seat when something made me look up. Call it intuition, or maybe just random paranoia, but I found myself studying the cars around us. The red sedan was 3 cars back in the right lane, matching our speed perfectly. Derek glanced in the rearview mirror. "The sedan?" Derek laughed. "Babe, we're all going in the same direction." He was right, of course. I went back to my book and forgot about it. But an hour later, when I looked up again, the red sedan was still there. Same position, same distance, keeping pace with us perfectly. We stopped for gas and lunch in Flagstaff, and I didn't think about the car again until we were back on the highway. That's when I saw it again. The same red sedan falling into position 3 cars behind us, matching our speed. He checked his mirrors. "You mean the red one? How can you tell?" I couldn't explain it, but I was sure it was the same vehicle. Something about the way it moved, the way it maintained that exact distance, felt deliberate and wrong. "Can you speed up a little?" Derek accelerated from 70 to 75 mph. Within minutes, the red sedan had adjusted its speed to match. When Derek slowed back down to 65, the sedan slowed down too, always maintaining that same 3-car buffer between us. "Okay, that's weird," Derek admitted. "We stayed on I-40 through Winona and Winslow, and the red sedan never wavered. It was still there when we crossed into New Mexico, still maintaining that precise distance." Derek was starting to get nervous too, checking his mirrors more frequently, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "This is probably nothing," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "People drive this route all the time for work, for vacation." But when we took the exit for Albuquerque and the red sedan followed us off the highway, we both knew this was no coincidence. Derek's brother lived in the foothills in a quiet residential neighborhood 15 minutes from the interstate. As we wound through suburban streets, getting farther and farther from any logical through route, the red sedan continued following us. Always the same distance, always the same deliberate pace. "This is insane," I whispered, turning around to get a better look at the car. The windows were tinted too dark to see the driver clearly, but I could make out the silhouette of a single person behind the wheel. Derek pulled into his brother's driveway, and we both watched as the red sedan drove slowly past the house, the driver's side window rolling down slightly as it passed. I couldn't see the driver's face, but I felt like we were being studied, cataloged, memorized. I asked, "And tell them what? Someone drove behind us on a public highway?" We decided to forget about it and enjoy the wedding weekend. Mark and his fiancée were wonderful hosts, and we had a great time at the rehearsal dinner and ceremony, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Sunday evening, as we were loading our car for the drive home, I saw it again. The red sedan parked at the end of the block, engine running. When we pulled out of Mark's driveway, it fell into position behind us. "You've got to be kidding me," Derek muttered, watching the car in his rearview mirror. This time, we decided to test our theory more aggressively. Derek took a random exit off I-40, one that led to a small town neither of us had ever been to. The red sedan followed. He drove through the town's main street, took several random turns, even pulled into a McDonald's parking lot and sat there for 10 minutes. The red sedan never lost us. It would hang back when we stopped, positioning itself where the driver could see our car but stay partially hidden. When we got moving again, it would resume that same 3-car distance. "This is really happening," Derek said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We got back on the highway and drove for another hour, trying different tactics. Derek would change lanes suddenly. The sedan would change lanes too. He'd speed up and slow down randomly. The sedan matched every change. At one point, he pulled off at a rest stop and parked where we could watch the exit. The red sedan pulled off too, but instead of parking, it drove slowly through the rest area, circling like a shark. The driver never got out, never approached us, just kept us in sight while maintaining distance. "We need to call the police," I said. We called 911 from the rest stop, and a state trooper met us there 20 minutes later. By then, the red sedan had disappeared, but the trooper took our report seriously. He said they'd had other complaints about a red sedan following travelers on that stretch of highway. Derek asked. 3 in the past month. The trooper suggested we file a formal report and gave us his card in case we saw the car again. He also recommended we change our route home, maybe take surface streets instead of the interstate. We decided to drive straight through Phoenix instead of taking the highway, figuring we'd lose our stalker in city traffic. But as we merged onto I-10 in Albuquerque, I saw a flash of red in my side mirror. This time, the sedan wasn't being subtle. It had moved up to just one car behind us, and I could see the driver more clearly. It was a man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was staring directly at our car, not even pretending to be a casual traveler anymore. Derek called 911 while driving, reporting our location and the license plate number I managed to read. The dispatcher said units were being directed to our area, but it would take time. That's when things got really scary. The red sedan started getting closer, pulling up right behind us, then backing off, then moving up again. The driver was playing with us, letting us know he was in control. When Derek tried to speed up, the sedan would accelerate aggressively, sometimes pulling alongside us in the left lane. During one of these passes, I got a clear look at the driver's face. He was smiling. Not a friendly smile, but something cold and predatory. He maintained eye contact with me for several long seconds before dropping back behind us. "He's enjoying this," I told Derek. We drove like that for another hour, the sedan alternately crowding us and hanging back, the driver clearly reveling in our fear. I was crying by then, convinced that this person meant to hurt us, and Derek was struggling to stay calm while driving. Finally, we saw police lights ahead. 2 state police cruisers were positioned on the shoulder, and Derek pulled over immediately. The red sedan drove past us without slowing down, the driver still wearing that horrible smile. The officers were incredibly helpful. They radioed ahead to other units and assured us they would escort us to the Phoenix city limits. One of them mentioned that they'd been trying to catch this particular driver for weeks. I asked. Not that we know of, but his behavior is escalating. First, he was just following people for short distances. Now it's hundreds of miles. The police escort made me feel safer, but I couldn't stop thinking about that smile, about the way the driver had looked at me like I was prey he was stalking. When we finally got home to Phoenix, I immediately started researching red sedan stalking cases online. What I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of reports across Arizona and New Mexico of a red sedan following travelers. Always the same pattern of behavior. But I also found older reports from other states. Colorado, Utah, Nevada, going back almost 2 years. The same car, or at least the same type of car, the same methodical stalking behavior. One report from Utah mentioned that a family had been followed for over 400 miles, all the way from Salt Lake City to the Colorado border. The driver had followed them to their hotel and sat in the parking lot all night watching their room. Another report from Nevada described a woman traveling alone who was followed for 6 hours. She'd called police multiple times, but every time officers arrived, the red sedan would disappear only to reappear as soon as she was alone again. The most disturbing report was from Colorado. A couple had been followed for 2 days straight, with the red sedan driver somehow tracking them to multiple hotels and restaurants. The report mentioned that police had found evidence the driver was using some kind of tracking device, but they never caught him. Reading these reports, I realized Derek and I had encountered a serial stalker, someone who had been terrorizing travelers across multiple states for years. We'd been lucky that police intervention had scared him off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter wasn't over. 3 weeks later, I found a red envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of my car in the parking lot at work. Inside was a single photograph. Derek and me at the rest stop in New Mexico, taken from behind while we were talking to the state trooper. I called the police immediately, but there wasn't much they could do. The photo had no fingerprints, no identifying marks. But it was a message. I'm still watching. I know where you work. I can find you anytime I want. We've since moved to a different apartment and I've changed jobs. We don't take road trips anymore, and we're both constantly aware of our surroundings when we're out in public. Derek installed a security system in our new place and bought a gun, though I hope we never have to use it. Sometimes I wonder how many people that man in the red sedan has followed. How many families he's terrorized just for the thrill of it. The police told us they're still looking for him, but he's careful, methodical, probably moves from state to state to avoid detection. I keep that photograph as a reminder to always trust my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if you ever find yourself being followed by a red sedan on a lonely highway, don't dismiss it as paranoia. Call the police immediately. Because somewhere out there, he's still driving those empty roads, looking for his next victims and enjoying every moment of terror he creates. Story 5. The motel with only one other guest. The morning we checked out, the desk clerk kept staring at us like we were ghosts. And when I asked him about the man in room 12, he told me that room had been sealed off for 3 years after a guest died in there. But I know what I heard through that wall, and I know someone was trying to get into our room all night long. My girlfriend Rachel and I were driving cross-country from Seattle to Miami, one of those spontaneous road trip adventures you take when you're young and stupid and think nothing bad can happen to you. We'd been on the road for 4 days, staying in cheap motels and sleeping in the car when we couldn't find anything affordable. It was our 5th night, somewhere in rural Texas, when we pulled into the Sunset Motor Lodge around midnight. We were exhausted running on gas station coffee and determination, and we just needed a place to crash for a few hours before getting back on the road. The motel looked like it was frozen in 1975, a single-story L-shaped building with about 20 rooms, a flickering neon sign, and a small office with wood paneling and shag carpet, the kind of place you'd drive past during the day and wonder who actually stays there. The night clerk was a thin, nervous-looking man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and thinning hair. When we walked in, he looked genuinely surprised to see customers. "We'd like a room for the night," Rachel said. He fumbled with the registration book, his hands shaking slightly. I asked. The guy seemed genuinely rattled by our presence. "Oh yes, fine. It's just that we don't get many guests this time of night." He handed me a registration form. "You'll be in room 14. As he said this, I heard footsteps from somewhere in the building. Slow, deliberate pacing, like someone walking back and forth in a room nearby. "Sounds like you do have other guests," Rachel observed. The clerk's face went pale. "Other guests? Oh yes, of course. Just one other guest tonight, very quiet gentleman, room 12, right next to yours." But even as he said this, the pacing continued, audible through the thin walls of the office. Back and forth, like someone who couldn't sleep. He gave us an old-fashioned metal key and pointed us toward the far end of the building. "Room 14 is right down there. If you need anything, just call the office." As we walked to our room, I noticed that most of the motel appeared to be empty. No cars in front of the rooms, no lights in any windows except for one, room 12, right next to ours. A dim light glowed behind closed curtains and I could see shadows moving inside. "At least we won't be alone," Rachel said as I unlocked our door. Room 14 was basic but clean, 2 double beds, a small TV, a bathroom that smelled like disinfectant. Rachel immediately flopped onto one of the beds while I checked the locks and pulled the curtains closed. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time. Footsteps in the room next door, not just walking, but pacing in a very specific pattern. 7 steps toward the wall we shared, pause, 7 steps back toward the window, pause, over and over, methodical and precise. "Somebody's restless over there," I said. Rachel was already half asleep. "Maybe he's got insomnia." But the pacing continued for hours. I lay in bed listening to those 7-step, pause, 7 steps, pause, trying to fall asleep despite the rhythmic sound. Around 2 a.m., the pacing stopped abruptly and I thought I might finally get some rest. That's when I heard the door handle. Someone was trying to open our door. Slowly, carefully, testing to see if it was locked. The handle turned maybe a 1/4 inch, met resistance from the deadbolt, then returned to position. A few seconds later, it happened again. I got up as quietly as I could and crept to the door, listening. I could hear breathing on the other side. Slow, steady breathing, like someone standing very close to the door, waiting. I looked through the peephole and saw a figure standing directly in front of our room. It was a man in what looked like pajamas or a robe, just standing there, facing the door. I couldn't make out his features clearly in the dim light from the parking lot, but something about his posture seemed wrong, too rigid, like he was a mannequin positioned there. I watched for several minutes and he never moved. Not shifting his weight, not looking around, just standing perfectly still facing our door. Finally, I heard footsteps moving away, and when I looked through the peephole again, he was gone. I went back to bed but couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, I'd hear sounds from room 12. Not pacing this time, but something else. Scraping sounds like furniture being moved around. Occasionally, what sounded like whispered conversations. though I couldn't make out any words. Around 4 a.m., Rachel woke up. She whispered, "The noise next door?" "No, not that." I held my breath and listened carefully. There was a new sound, a rhythmic tapping on our shared wall. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, like someone trying to communicate in code. Rachel suggested, though we'd been silent for hours. The tapping continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped. A few minutes later, I heard the door handle turning again. This time, I got up immediately and looked through the peephole. The same figure was standing there, but now he was closer to the door, his face almost pressed against the peephole. I jerked back instinctively, my heart pounding. When I looked again, he was gone. The rest of the night passed in restless half-sleep, punctuated by strange sounds from next door and periodic attempts to open our door. By the time morning came, Rachel and I were both exhausted and on edge. We packed quickly and headed to the office to check out. The same clerk was there, looking like he hadn't slept either. His nervousness from the night before had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He asked, not making eye contact. "Fine, except for the noise from room 12, I said. The clerk went very still. The man in room 12, the color drained completely from the clerk's face. "What do you mean?" "No, sir, you must be mistaken. Room 12 has been..." Rachel stepped forward. "We heard someone in there all night." The clerk's hands started shaking again. "Room 12 has been locked for 3 years. No one goes in there." "Why?" He hesitated for a long moment, then spoke in a whisper. "We had a guest die in that room. Natural causes, they said, but strange circumstances. He'd been staying there for weeks, hardly ever came out. My skin was crawling now. 3 years ago this week, we sealed the room after that." Rachel grabbed my arm. "But we saw lights." The clerk nodded miserably. "It happens sometimes. Other guests have reported the same things, noises from room 12, someone trying to get into their rooms. Because most people think we're crazy, and because..." "The room directly next to his, the room we'd spent the night in?" I asked. "That was his room originally. He'd requested it specifically when he first checked in. Said he liked the location, the view. He would pace all night, try to get into other people's rooms, stand outside their doors for hours. We thought moving him would solve the problem, but it just got worse. We left the Sunset Motor Lodge as quickly as possible, but the experience has haunted me ever since. I've researched the place online and I found several reviews mentioning similar experiences. Guests in room 14 reporting noises from the supposedly empty room 12. Someone trying to get into their room at night. One review from 6 months ago described exactly what we experienced. The pacing, the door handle turning, the figure standing outside the peephole. The reviewer said they'd complained to management, who admitted they'd had the same complaints for years, but couldn't do anything about it. Another review mentioned that the motel had tried to rent room 12 again about a year after the man died, but guests would check out in the middle of the night claiming the room was haunted. They said objects would move on their own, the temperature would drop suddenly, and they would hear breathing in the room when they were alone. What bothers me most is the clerk's insistence that the man had originally wanted room 14, our room. If that's true, then we spent the night in a place he considered his territory, his space. And based on what we experienced, he's still trying to claim it. I've stayed in hundreds of motels since then, but I always ask for a room that's not adjacent to any long-term vacant rooms, and I always check to make sure the door handle works properly from the inside, because I never want to feel trapped in a room with someone, or something, trying to get in. Rachel won't stay in small motels at all anymore. She says she can still hear that methodical pacing in her dreams, those 7 steps toward the wall and 7 steps back. And sometimes in the middle of the night she'll wake up convinced she heard someone trying our door handle. I tell her it's just her imagination, but honestly, I'm not so sure because sometimes I hear it too. That slow, deliberate turning of a door handle. Someone testing to see if they can get in. And when I check, there's never anyone there. But I can still feel them standing just outside, waiting patiently for their chance to reclaim what they think is rightfully theirs. Story 6. We found a camcorder in the rest stop bathroom. The timestamp on that video still doesn't make sense to me 3 months later. It showed us arriving at a rest stop 3 days before we'd even left home. But there we were on the screen, clear as day, going through the exact same motions we were about to perform. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how normal everything seemed until we played that footage. My sister Lauren and I were driving from Portland to visit our parents in Boise for Thanksgiving. It's about a 5-hour drive through some pretty remote areas of Oregon and Idaho, the kind of route where you see more trees than people and cell service comes and goes. We'd been on the road for about 3 hours when Lauren announced she needed to use the bathroom. The next exit led to one of those isolated rest stops you find on rural highways. Just a small building with restrooms and a few picnic tables surrounded by pine trees and not much else. The parking area had maybe 6 or 7 cars scattered around, mostly travelers like us taking a break from the long drive. It was a crisp November afternoon and the place had that peaceful, middle-of-nowhere feeling that makes you appreciate the open road. Lauren headed straight for the women's restroom while I stretched my legs and checked my phone. No service, as expected. I was walking back to the car when Lauren called out from inside the bathroom. I waited outside the door. "There's something weird in here." I looked around to make sure no one else was nearby, then stepped into the women's restroom. Lauren was standing by the paper towel dispenser, pointing behind it. "Look at this," she said. Wedged between the dispenser and the wall was a small camcorder, the old-fashioned kind with the flip-out screen. It was partially hidden but still visible if you knew where to look, and the little red recording light was blinking. "It's still recording," Lauren said. I carefully pulled the camera out from its hiding spot. It was an older model, probably 10 years old, with a mini DV tape inside. The battery indicator showed it was nearly dead. Lauren asked, "For what? Finding a camera in a public restroom? Behind the paper towel dispenser?" She had a point. The placement was too deliberate to be accidental. Someone had hidden this camera here on purpose, angling it to capture anyone using the restroom. "Let's see what's on it first," I suggested. We took the camera back to our car and I connected it to Lauren's laptop using a cable from my camera bag. The screen showed dozens of video files, most of them just a few minutes long. "Okay, this is definitely not innocent," Lauren said, scrolling through the file list. The timestamps went back several days, with new files created every few hours. Someone had been systematically recording people at this rest stop for almost a week. "We have to call the police," Lauren said. "This is illegal." "Absolutely, but let's see who's been doing this first." I opened one of the more recent files, expecting to see footage of unsuspecting travelers using the restroom. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. It was us. Lauren and me, walking into the rest stop, captured from the camera's position behind the paper towel dispenser. The timestamp showed the date as 3 days ago. "That's impossible," Lauren whispered. "We weren't even here 3 days ago." I checked the timestamp again, then looked at the date on the laptop. The video was definitely marked as being recorded 3 days before our current trip. "Maybe the camera's date is wrong," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew that didn't explain what we were seeing. In the video, Lauren walked into the bathroom wearing the exact same clothes she had on right now. I watched myself stretch my legs outside, check my phone, and walk back to our car, the same car we'd driven here today, with the same luggage visible through the windows. "Play the next file," Lauren said, her voice shaking. The next video showed us discovering the camera just as we had moments before. I watched myself pull the camera from behind the dispenser while Lauren stood in the exact same position, wearing the exact same expression of confusion and concern. "This is insane," I said. We continued scrolling through the files, and each one showed a different part of our visit to the rest stop. In one video, we were sitting in our car looking at the laptop. In another, we were standing by the car having what looked like an intense conversation. But all of these videos were time-stamped as being recorded days before we'd even left Portland. "Look at this one," Lauren said, pointing to a file at the end of the list. The timestamp showed it was recorded 2 hours in the future, 2 p.m., when it was currently noon. I opened the file and watched in horror as it showed us packing up our car and driving away from the rest stop. In the video, both Lauren and I looked terrified, constantly checking our mirrors as we pulled back onto the highway. "We haven't done that yet," Lauren whispered. I scrolled through more files and found others that were time-stamped even further in the future. One showed us arriving at our parents' house that evening, both of us looking shaken and upset. Another showed us sitting at dinner, barely eating, occasionally glancing toward the windows like we expected to see something outside. Lauren asked. I didn't have an answer. The whole situation defied logic, but the evidence was right there on the screen. Someone or something had been recording our future actions, documenting a trip we had only just begun. "We need to get out of here," Lauren said. As we were packing up the laptop, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. Mixed in with the videos of us were recordings of other people, dozens of different travelers who had stopped at this rest stop over the past week. But when I looked at their timestamps, they were all marked as future dates too. One video showed a family with young children, time-stamped for next week. Another showed an elderly couple, dated for next month. It was like the camera was somehow recording events that wouldn't happen for days or weeks to come. "Look at this," I said, showing Lauren a video of a young man traveling alone. According to the timestamp, it was recorded 6 months in the future, but something about the video was different. The quality was strange, almost dreamlike, and the man's movements seemed slow and unnatural. "He looks sick," Lauren observed. In the video, the man was stumbling as he walked, and there were dark stains on his clothes. He kept looking over his shoulder as if something was chasing him, and his face showed pure terror. "I don't want to see any more," Lauren said, closing the laptop. But as we were getting ready to go, I noticed a car pulling into the rest stop. The same car we'd just seen in one of the future videos. A middle-aged woman got out, wearing exactly the same clothes we'd seen her wearing in the recording. "Lauren, look," I said, pointing to the woman. Lauren glanced at the woman, then at me with growing fear in her eyes. I tried to remember. We watched as the woman walked toward the restroom, moving in exactly the same way we'd seen in the video. It was like watching a scene replay in real life, down to the smallest detail. "We're seeing the future," Lauren whispered. But if that was true, what did it mean for the videos of us? Were we destined to drive away in terror, to arrive at our parents' house looking shaken and upset? Were we trapped in some predetermined sequence of events? I made a decision that I hoped would prove the videos wrong. Instead of leaving immediately as we'd seen ourselves do in the recording, I walked back into the rest stop and placed the camera on the information board where other travelers would be sure to see it. Lauren asked, "Changing the future?" But as soon as I stepped back outside, I felt an overwhelming urge to get back in the car and drive away as fast as possible. It wasn't rational, just a sudden, desperate need to put distance between us and this place. Lauren felt it too. "We have to go," she said urgently. "Right now." We got in the car and drove away, checking our mirrors constantly, just as we'd seen ourselves do in the video. Despite my attempt to change things, we ended up following the exact sequence of events the camera had recorded. When we reached our parents' house that evening, we told them about the camera and showed them some of the videos. My dad, who's always been skeptical of anything supernatural, thought we'd been the victims of some elaborate prank. But my mom, who's more open-minded, believed us completely. "There are places where time gets confused," she said. "Spots where the past and future bleed through into the present." I called the state police the next day to report the camera. But when they investigated, they found nothing. The camera I'd left on the information board was gone, and there was no evidence it had ever been there. 3 weeks later, I found a news article online about the rest stop. A family had reported finding a camcorder hidden in the women's restroom, containing videos of travelers that appeared to be recorded before their visits. The police investigated but couldn't explain how the camera had captured footage of people who hadn't yet arrived. The article mentioned that similar cameras had been found at rest stops across 3 states, all containing the same type of impossible recordings. Authorities were investigating possible connections between the incidents, but no arrests had been made. I still have copies of those videos on Lauren's laptop. Sometimes late at night, I'll watch them and try to understand how a simple camcorder could record events that hadn't happened yet. The timestamps never make sense, the future footage never gets less disturbing, and the questions never get answered. But what haunts me most is a detail I noticed in one of the videos we didn't watch completely. It showed the interior of our car during the drive home, and in the reflection of the rearview mirror, you could see another car following us. The same red sedan that appeared in several other future videos, always maintaining the same distance behind different travelers. Lauren doesn't remember seeing that car during our actual drive home, but when I enhanced the image, I could make out a figure behind the wheel. Someone who seemed to be smiling, like they knew something we didn't. I haven't been back to that rest stop, and I probably never will. But sometimes I wonder if there's still a camera there somewhere, recording the future visits of unsuspecting travelers, documenting events that haven't happened yet, but somehow already exist in that strange space between now and then. Story 7. My best friend started acting strange after the accident. The worst part wasn't when Jake told me he didn't survive the crash. The worst part was realizing he was right, and I'd been driving across 3 states with something wearing my best friend's face. But I need to start with the accident itself, because that's when everything changed. Even though it took me days to understand what had really happened on that mountain road, Jake and I had been best friends since college. The kind of friendship where you can spend hours talking about nothing and everything. When we graduated, we decided to take one last road trip together before we both started our new jobs. Denver to Seattle, taking the scenic route through the mountains. We'd been driving for 2 days, trading off behind the wheel, listening to music and reliving our favorite college memories. Jake was the navigator, constantly finding interesting detours and scenic overlooks. He had this infectious enthusiasm for adventure that made every trip feel like a quest. It was early evening on our 3rd day when we were driving through a particularly remote stretch of mountain highway in Colorado. The road was winding and narrow, with steep drops on one side and rock faces on the other. Jake was behind the wheel, and I was dozing in the passenger seat when I heard him curse loudly. I opened my eyes just in time to see a deer leap into the road directly in front of us. Jake yanked the steering wheel hard to the left, but there was nowhere to go, just a guardrail and a 100-foot drop into a rocky canyon below. The car hit the guardrail at about 40 miles per hour, and I remember the horrible sound of metal tearing as we broke through. For a few terrifying seconds, we were airborne, and I thought we were going to die, but we didn't fall into the canyon. The car slammed into a ledge about 15 feet below the road, coming to rest at a steep angle against some pine trees. My seatbelt had kept me in place, but my left arm was badly bruised and my head was ringing. "Jake?" He was slumped forward against the steering wheel, not moving. There was blood on his forehead where he'd hit the windshield and his eyes were closed. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might be dead. I shook his shoulder, and he finally stirred. "What?" He sat up slowly, touching his head and wincing. "We hit a deer. Are you hurt?" He tested his arms and legs, rotated his neck carefully. "I think I'm okay. Dizzy, but okay. Bruised up, but nothing broken." That's when we realized how much trouble we were in. The car was totaled, resting against the trees at an angle that made it impossible to drive. My phone had no signal, and Jake's had been thrown somewhere in the car during the crash. "Someone will drive by eventually," Jake said. But as darkness fell, we realized that eventually might be a long time. We hadn't seen another car in hours before the accident. And this stretch of highway was mostly used by locals who knew to avoid driving at night on the winding mountain roads. We spent the night in the car, taking turns staying awake to listen for rescue vehicles. Jake seemed fine after the initial confusion, talking normally, making jokes to keep our spirits up, helping me fashion a sling for my injured arm. A highway patrol officer found us the next morning and called for a tow truck and ambulance. The paramedics checked us both over and said we were incredibly lucky. The trees had stopped us from falling into the canyon, and our injuries were relatively minor. "Head injuries can be tricky, though," the paramedic told Jake. Jake waved off the concern. "I feel fine." And he did seem fine, at least for the first day after the accident. We rented a car in the nearest town and continued our trip to Seattle. Jake was even more energetic than usual, eager to see everything and try every restaurant we passed. But by the second day, I started noticing small things that seemed off. We stopped at a diner for breakfast, and when the waitress brought our food, Jake stared at his pancakes like he'd never seen them before. I asked. "No, it's just..." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "With a fork, dude." But Jake wasn't joking. He picked up his fork and held it awkwardly like he was trying to remember how it worked. When he finally cut a piece of pancake, he chewed it slowly and thoughtfully, as if analyzing the taste. "Jake, are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," he said, but he continued eating in that strange, deliberate way, studying each bite. Throughout the day, I noticed other odd behaviors. Jake would stare at things for long periods, road signs, other cars, his own hands, like he was seeing them for the first time. When I asked him about our college friends or shared memories, he would nod and smile, but his responses were vague and generic. I asked as we drove through Utah. "Oh yeah," Jake said. "That was..." But Jake had never fallen off any roof into any pool. I was testing him and he'd failed completely. The real Jake would have laughed and reminded me that it was actually me who had fallen, and that it was Thompson's house, not Miller's. He glanced at me with a strange smile. "Just curious? We've been friends for 4 years." "Of course I know, it's..." My middle name is Alexander. Jake had been my best man at my brother's wedding, where he'd had to say my full name during the toast. There was no way he could forget something that basic. "Dude, you definitely have a concussion. I don't need a hospital," Jake said, and something in his voice made me look at him more carefully. His expression was completely calm, but his eyes seemed wrong somehow. Too dark, too focused, like he was studying me instead of just talking to me. "I'm fine," he continued. "Better than I've ever been, actually. That crash? Nothing. But I didn't know, because this wasn't the Jake I'd known for 4 years. This person looked like Jake, sounded like Jake, but all the details that made him uniquely himself seemed to have been erased. That night, we stayed in a motel in Salt Lake City. I was exhausted from driving and worried about Jake, so I went to bed early. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to find Jake sitting in the chair by the window, staring at me in the darkness. "Jake?" "Just watching you sleep," he said in a conversational tone. "That's weird, man. I don't really need sleep anymore." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked at him more carefully. Jake was sitting perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, that strange smile on his face. "I mean, I don't get tired, I just exist." "Jake, you're scaring me." "I told you, I'm fine, I'm better than fine." "What things?" Jake stood up and walked over to my bed. In the lamplight, I could see his face clearly, and what I saw made me want to run. His expression was calm and friendly, but his eyes were completely empty, like looking into the windows of an abandoned house. "I didn't make it out of that crash," he said matter-of-factly. "Neither did you, really. We're both just Jake, that doesn't make sense." He tilted his head, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't. Every instinct I had was screaming that something fundamental had changed, that the person standing next to my bed wasn't my friend anymore. "You're hurt," I said. "You hit your head." "I'm not confused at all." Jake smiled, and I noticed that his teeth seemed sharper than they used to be. I got dressed and told Jake we were leaving immediately. I drove through the night while he sat in the passenger seat, occasionally making comments about the landscape or other drivers, but never in a way that sounded natural. It was like he was practicing human conversation, trying to remember how it was supposed to work. "That truck driver looks tired," he would say about a semi we passed. The comments weren't wrong, but they felt scripted, like someone reading lines from a play about normal human interactions. By the time we reached Seattle, I was convinced that Jake had suffered serious brain damage in the accident. I planned to take him straight to a hospital and call his parents, but when we pulled into the city, he seemed to perk up. "I should probably go home now," he said. "Jake, I'm not letting you go anywhere alone. I need to go home," he repeated, and this time there was something final in his voice. "This has been educational." Jake turned to look at me one last time, and in his eyes I saw something that definitely wasn't human. Something ancient and patient and completely without warmth. He got out of the car and walked away, moving with a fluid grace that Jake had never possessed. I sat there for several minutes trying to process what had just happened before driving to the nearest police station. I told them everything: the accident, Jake's strange behavior, his final words to me. The officer took my report seriously and said they'd look into it. He also suggested I see a doctor myself in case I'd suffered a head injury that was affecting my perception. 2 days later, I got a call from Jake's parents. They said Jake had never come home from our trip. They'd filed a missing person report and were asking if I knew where he was. I told them about the accident and described Jake's behavior afterward, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them about our final conversation. How do you tell parents that their son might have died in a car crash and something else had been wearing his face for 4 days? The police found our wrecked car where we'd left it on the mountain ledge. They also found something else, Jake's body still in the driver's seat, apparently killed on impact when we hit the trees. According to the coroner, Jake had been dead for at least a week. But I'd spent 4 days with him after the accident. I'd talked to him, eaten meals with him, shared a motel room with him. If Jake had died in the crash, then what had I been traveling with? The police ruled it an accidental death and closed the case. They said I must have been confused about the timeline, that trauma can cause false memories and hallucinations. But I know what I experienced, and I know that whatever got out of our car in Seattle wasn't my friend. Sometimes I wonder if I really did die in that crash, and everything since then has been some kind of afterlife hallucination. But if that's true, then what was Jake? What was pretending to be him, learning from me, studying human behavior? I've never seen him again. But sometimes I get reports from mutual friends about Jake sightings. Someone who looks like him spotted in different cities, always alone, always watching people from a distance. Never approaching, never interacting, just observing. I think something found us in that crash, something that needed a human form to move through the world. It took Jake's body and tried to take his identity, but it couldn't quite master the subtleties of being human. The question that haunts me is, how many others are out there? How many accidents happen in remote places where something inhuman can step into the void left by the dead? And the worst question of all, am I really still alive, or am I just better at pretending than Jake was? I'm still driving 3 months later because I'm afraid of what will happen if I pull over again. But let me tell you how this all started. Because I need someone to understand what's happening to me on America's highways. I'm a long-haul trucker, have been for 15 years. I've driven every major highway in the continental United States, seen every kind of weather, every type of accident, every variety of roadside tragedy you can imagine. After a while, you become numb to it all. Twisted metal, flashing lights, traffic delays. It's just part of the job. 3 months ago, I was driving a load from Phoenix to Chicago, taking my usual route up through New Mexico and Texas. It was a clear Tuesday morning when I saw the wreck on I-10 just outside Las Cruces. A white SUV had rolled multiple times and come to rest on its side about 50 yards off the highway. Emergency vehicles surrounded it. Fire trucks, ambulances, state police cruisers, their red and blue lights cutting through the desert air. I slowed down with the rest of the traffic, watching as paramedics loaded a stretcher into an ambulance. It looked bad, the kind of accident where people don't walk away. The SUV was completely destroyed, windows blown out, roof crushed, metal twisted into impossible shapes. I only noticed it because my daughter's birthday is 2/47 and the combination stood out to me. I drove on, put the accident out of my mind, and focused on making good time to Chicago, but 6 hours later, somewhere outside Amarillo, I saw it again. Same white SUV, same position off the highway, same emergency vehicles surrounding it, same paramedics loading the same stretcher, even the same license plate, HVN 247. I pulled over at the next truck stop and called my dispatcher asking if there'd been reports of multiple accidents involving white SUVs. He said no, just normal highway conditions all along my route. Maybe it was a different vehicle, he suggested. But I knew what I'd seen. The damage pattern was identical, the position of the vehicles was exactly the same. Even the angle of the ambulance doors was perfectly replicated. It was the same accident, somehow happening in 2 places at once. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that highway hypnosis was making me see patterns that weren't there. But when I reached Oklahoma the next day and saw the identical scene again, same SUV, same emergency response, same license plate, I knew something impossible was happening. This time, I pulled over and walked closer to the accident scene. A state trooper approached me before I could get very near. "Sir, you need to stay back." "Officer, I've seen this exact accident 3 times in the past 2 days." He looked at me with concern. "Sir, have you been drinking?" "No, I'm a professional driver." The trooper studied my face carefully. I passed the test easily, but the officer still seemed suspicious. But I wasn't imagining things. Over the next week, as I drove different routes across the Midwest, I saw the same accident 7 more times. Always the same white SUV with license plate HVN 247. Always the same catastrophic rollover, always the same emergency response. Sometimes it would be on I-80 in Iowa, sometimes on I-70 in Kansas. Once I saw it on a rural highway in Nebraska where the landscape was completely different. Flat farmland instead of desert, but the accident itself was identical in every detail. I started documenting everything with my phone camera, taking pictures of each scene from different angles. When I reviewed the photos later, they all showed the exact same accident. The metadata confirmed they were taken on different days in different states, but the images were so similar they could have been copies of the same photograph. After 2 weeks of this, I decided to investigate more actively. Instead of just driving past, I would pull over and try to talk to the first responders to get details about what had happened. The story was always the same. A single vehicle rollover, driver ejected, critical condition, no witnesses. But when I asked about the victim's identity or which hospital they were being taken to, I got vague answers or was told it was confidential information. One paramedic in Missouri told me the victim was a middle-aged man traveling alone. A firefighter in Arkansas said it was a young woman with her children. A police officer in Tennessee insisted there were no survivors. Their stories never matched, even though they were all responding to the identical accident. That's when I started to suspect this wasn't really an accident at all. It was something else. Something that just looked like an accident to people like me who happened to be driving by. 3 weeks into this nightmare, I saw the wreck again on I-75 in Georgia. This time, instead of stopping to talk to the emergency responders, I parked on the shoulder and waited. I wanted to see what happened after the scene was cleaned up. For 2 hours, I watched the paramedics work, the fire department cutting apart the SUV, the police taking measurements and photos. It all looked completely normal and professional. But when they finally finished and drove away, something strange happened. Instead of calling a tow truck to remove the wreck, they just left it there. The white SUV sat on its side in the grass, completely abandoned. No cleanup crew, no removal team, nothing. I waited another hour, then walked over to examine the vehicle more closely. Up close, the damage looked less realistic somehow. The metal was twisted and burned, but it didn't feel quite right. When I touched the SUV's frame, it felt hollow, like a movie prop rather than actual wreckage. The license plate was still hanging there, HVN 247. But when I tried to bend it, it felt like plastic rather than metal. The whole thing was fake, an elaborate stage set designed to look like a real accident from a distance. But if it was fake, who was staging it? And why was I seeing it over and over again across multiple states? I started researching the license plate number online, trying to find any record of a vehicle with those digits. What I found made my blood run cold. HVN 247 had been reported in dozens of accident reports across the past year. Always the same type of rollover, always with conflicting details about the victims. Online forums for truck drivers and highway workers were full of reports about the phantom accident, people describing the exact same scene I'd been witnessing, always appearing on different highways, always with the same impossible consistency. One post from a highway patrol officer mentioned that emergency responders had been receiving fake calls about this accident for months. They would arrive on scene to find the wreck exactly as reported, but when they tried to process it through official channels, the incident would disappear from their systems. Another post from a tow truck driver described arriving to clean up the HVN 247 wreck and finding nothing there. Dispatch sent me to the exact coordinates where multiple witnesses reported the rollover, but there was just empty highway. Reading these accounts, I realized I wasn't the only one caught in this loop. Hundreds of people had encountered the phantom accident, and none of us could make sense of it. Last month, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of just driving past the next time I saw the wreck, I was going to stop my truck directly at the scene and demand answers from whoever was orchestrating this elaborate deception. I didn't have to wait long. The accident appeared again on I-40 in New Mexico, in almost the exact spot where I'd first seen it months earlier. I pulled my truck over and walked directly toward the emergency vehicles, ignoring the officers who tried to wave me back. "I want to know what's really going on here," I shouted. One of the state troopers approached me, and as he got closer, I felt a chill of recognition. He had my face, not similar features, not someone who looked like me, but my exact face wearing a police uniform. "Sir, you need to calm down," he said in my own voice. "What the hell is this?" "I'm you," he said matter-of-factly. "You've been driving past this accident for months," the officer continued. "Every time you slow down, you look, you wonder what happened. But you never stop, you never investigate." "I stopped plenty of times. No, you talked to projections, echoes, you never really engaged with what was happening." The officer smiled. My own smile, which was somehow more unsettling than any stranger's face could have been. "When did you first see this accident?" I thought back, trying to remember. The truth hit me like a physical blow. 6 months ago, I whispered. The memory came flooding back. I'd been driving this same route, Phoenix to Chicago, when I'd seen an accident scene that looked just like all the others. But that time I hadn't just driven past. I'd stopped to help. I'd pulled over and run toward the white SUV, trying to see if anyone needed assistance. And the last thing I remembered was reaching for the driver's door handle. "You died in that accident," the officer said gently. "The real accident, 6 months ago." "That's impossible. I've been home, I've talked to my family, I've delivered loads." "Have you?" I tried to remember the details of the past 6 months, but they felt vague and dreamlike. Had I really talked to my dispatcher, or had I just imagined those conversations? Had I actually delivered any loads, or had I been driving empty highways this whole time? The officer asked. I started to answer, then realized I wasn't sure. Time seemed fluid out here on the highways, days blending into weeks, weeks into months. "You should have stopped the first time," he continued. "When you were still alive, when it would have mattered. Now you have a choice. You can keep driving, keep seeing the accident, keep pretending you're still alive." I looked around at the other emergency responders, and for the first time I saw them clearly. They all had faces I recognized. Other drivers, other travelers who had stopped to help at highway accidents over the years. All of us caught in the same loop, replaying our final moments over and over. "I'm not ready to stop driving," I said. The officer nodded sadly. "I know. Most of us aren't at first. 2 years. Some take longer, some figure it out faster." I walked back to my rig and got behind the wheel, my hands shaking as I started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I watched the accident scene fade away, but I knew it would be waiting for me somewhere up ahead. That was 3 months ago, and I'm still driving. I've seen the wreck hundreds more times now, always the same white SUV with license plate HVN 247. Sometimes I recognize other drivers who slow down to look. People who are just beginning their own loops, not yet understanding what they're seeing. I know I should stop the truck. I know I should accept what the officer told me and join the other emergency responders, find whatever peace comes with admitting the truth. But I'm not ready yet. I keep thinking there might be another explanation, another way to understand what's happening to me. So I keep driving, keep seeing the same accident, keep hoping that the next time will be different. Maybe it will be. Or maybe I'll drive these highways forever, watching the same tragedy play out endlessly, never quite ready to acknowledge that I'm not really behind the wheel anymore. The accident is up ahead now. I can see the flashing lights in the distance. I'm slowing down with the rest of the traffic. And I know that in a few minutes I'll see the white SUV again, rolled over on its side, license plate HVN 247 hanging at that impossible angle. And maybe this time, I'll finally be ready to stop.